Hello and welcome to another Doctor Who Big Finish video. If you can't tell already, we're doing something Third Doctor related. Huzzah, because of the outfit and the mug. Brilliant. Yes, because today we're looking at this. The Third Doctor Adventures Volume 4, my most anticipated release from Big Finish for 2018. Because one, it's the Third Doctor, he's my favourite Doctor, and you're not going to change my opinion, so don't even bother trying to at me and prove me wrong, because that's my opinion. And I love the Third Doctor. The second reason is the Cybermen. Yes, the Third Doctor versus the Cybermen. And this is the first time it's properly been done. Because, you know, you're probably going to get somebody going, well, actually, Pertwee Smith 11, in the 5 Doctors, the Third Doctor did face the Cybermen. Yes, he technically did see the Cybermen, but that was more of a Rashton warrior robot destroying a whole cyber army. It's more the Third Doctor and Sarah just hiding by a rock, just going, don't move. Right, come on, Sarah. That's basically the 5 Doctors. The Third Doctor basically going, right, we'll stay by this rock, and we're not going to move. That's basically that. Then we have the Companion Chronicle, the Bluetooth, which I absolutely love. It's one of my favourite Companion Chronicles. I just love it. But this is the first time the Third Doctor and the Cybermen have a full cast adventure. So it's incredibly exciting. Granted, we do have the meddling monk as well, but we're all here for the Tyrant of Logic. Written by Mark Platt, the person who knows how to write the Cybermen. So without further ado, let's look at the presentation. Right, for the presentation, we have Joe Grant there, we've got the Cyberman, the Third Doctor looking all very defiant, we've got the meddling monk, a Manor House background with a sort of cyber text going along. We have the Third Doctor banner, which I still don't like. I think they should use the Third Doctor face, because I think it's a bit disrespectful for John, really, because they use you know, the First Doctor icon, the Second Doctor icon, and even though they're played by different people, you know, Fraser Hines, Peter Purvis, I just think it's a bit disrespectful for Pertwee, not having his face on the banner. And there, taking a look at the little booklet, we have production credits there, and we have a lovely photo of Tim Treloar, Katie Manning and Rufus Hound there, and the cast list for the story. And the disc art is exactly the same for all 5 right discs. Then, kicking off with Rise of the New Humans by Guy Adams. Now, Guy Adams has wrote my favourite story from the range, Transcendence of Ephros, because the thing I find with the Third Doctor Adventures range is you'll have one fantastic story or good story, and then the second story is either average or poor. And this is probably down to me being a Third Doctor fanboy. You know, he's my favourite Doctor since I was 8, so I know how John Pertwee would deliver a line. You know, I've seen his stories countless times. I know the ingredients will make a solid Third Doctor story. You know, and his era for me is perfect. And I know his era like the back of my own hand. So when Big Finish is doing the Third Doctor, I only expect the best. You know, so the Third Doctor Adventures is where I'm most critical. Because I care so much about his era, I only want the best. So back to the story, we see the Third Doctor go head to head with the meddling monk again, as he has encountered the monk before in his short trip called the Blame Game. Which I haven't got simply because I'm not a fan of Rufus Hound's portrayal as the monk. So that made me a little worried, as I feel that there are certain monsters and villains what shouldn't go with a Doctor, and the monk to me shouldn't go with the Third Doctor because the Master is the main foe of his era. So for me it just feels wrong, the Third Doctor facing the monk, and personally the monk does feel like a Poundland Master within this story, as you know the Doctor does say within the story, you know, this has the hallmarks of the Master all over it. And the plan within the story does feel very mastery, and the monk I do feel fills the same role as the Master within the story. The story is solid, but I do feel like the story is missing a few pieces of the jigsaw, which I will talk about later. The feel of the story does feel very Mind of Evil-esque, so if you like the Mind of Evil then you're going to like this story, with the Season 10 interplay between the Doctor and Joe, mixed with the grit of Season 7, so it's quite a nice concoction. Part 1 to me is just perfect. You know, I love how Guy Adams has captured the Third Doctor and Joe's chemistry. It's just magical. And that certainly is a real highlight for me. So, the start of the story is where we get the Season 7 grit, with somebody jumping off a high-rise car park and tried to grow wings. And this is where the Mind of Evil bit comes into it, I feel. Instead of being killed by your fear, you know, your body will try and evolve to stop you dying. So if you're drowning, your body will try and develop gills. So off the Doctor and Joe go to this research facility to uncover the truth. So we have these lovely scenes in Bessie, and that's basically part 1. And I have to say that this is probably my favourite episode of the story, because the scenes between the Doctor and Joe are just utterly brilliant, you know, because you can really picture you know, them wandering around the facility at night and them driving around in Bessie. It's just so John and Katie, and I just think it's a perfect start to a story. Part 2. So this part is pretty light on plot, as I will say this story is very much driven by characters. So we have a fair bit of back and forth between the Doctor and Joe and the monk. We do have a nice little callback to the Three Doctors with Omega, and we even have a little reference back to the 8th Doctor adventures with mentioning Lucy Miller. So the story continues the plot thread of what presence does Joe keep sensing, but the plot really doesn't start kicking in until sort of the last 3 minutes of part 2. I have to say, this is when the story really changes gear and starts to ramp it up. Though this, you know, the talky character-based scenes do continue with the 3rd Doctor locking horns against Dr. Curdie, who only sees the bigger picture and doesn't treat failures as humans. So this is when the story really ramps up the moral and ethical nature, as we see the 3rd Doctor really pushed into a corner with no choice but to help. So he takes on a very scientist role with him finding a cure. Where while this is all happening, I will say that the main threat is revealed as we see the rise of the new humans. Part 4. This is very much the action part of the story of the monk showing his true colours, as we see the involvement of UNIT within this story, and it does kind of have a claustrophobic feel to it, but it's very minor. But I do feel this episode does lose something, as I feel this episode pushes the boundaries a bit too far, making me lose some enjoyment. So moving on to characters now, we have the 3rd Doctor played by Tim Treloar. Well, I'm impressed. Tim Treloar, each box set is getting a step closer, you know, each time. I wouldn't say he's a dead ringer to John, because John's voice is so distinct and rich. You know, it's a hard voice to nail down, and I feel because Guy Adams knows how to write the 3rd Doctor, it just helps boost his performance. And I think Tim Treloar does a marvellous job, and you do get the odd sort of one line where you think that's John. But character-wise, you do get the Venusian Aikido, you know, being very protective over Joe, the scientist, you know, concerned for the well-being of time. So he's very much sort of standing up for the little person, you know, being very moral. And it's just classic 3rd Doctor of him locking horns with people in authority. It's just absolutely wonderful. And Tim Treloar, I take my hat off to him. He's doing a really wonderful job. You know, this is the best I've seen him in the 3rd Doctor adventures. Joe Grant, played by Katie Manning. Again, classic Joe, wonderfully performed by Katie, with her not wanting to leave the Doctor's side. But she does get a very interesting role in part 4. She has some nice funny lines, you know, wanting to prove the Brigadier wrong, and, you know, I love the scenes when she's standing up against the monk. It's just wonderful. Katie Manning, brilliant job. The monk, played by Rufus Hound, a very extravagant and colourful character, you know, very much a character thinking of himself, you know, how will this benefit him with, you know, profits. You know, he's playing God with all these different lives, and he's pretty manipulative within this, but I'm still not a fan of his portrayal as a monk. Even though this is a 3rd Doctor story, I'm just not connected with him. He just feels like a Poundland master. So what are my overall thoughts on Rise of the New Humans? Overall, I think that it's a very good story. Very light on plot, which I don't mind, because the character interactions kind of make you forget about the plot. Because like I said, this is very much a character-driven story. It's a story where you've kind of got to go and look for the plot, and then you'll be like, oh, there's a plot. But like I said, it's very much a character-based story. I do feel like this story just comes across a little bit hollow, like it's missing a few pieces, because this story has all the ingredients for it to be, you know, a 3rd Doctor story. It just falls short on the end result, like just making it feel very hollow, like the involvement of UNIT. You could have had Benton and Yates, instead we have another UNIT person. And, you know, you could have just said, oh, the Brigadier's, you know, at Geneva or something like that, just to get around that problem. I think that would have worked rather well. But I feel like as well, the monk, like I've said, you know, he's very much a cheap alternative to the Master. And I feel the monk just didn't fill the hole where the Master should have been. And that's why I think it's a bit hollow, because you've got a new UNIT character within it, you know. And I think by including, you know, Benton and the Yates and just mentioning the brig is in Geneva, I think by doing that, I think it will make the story feel a bit more complete and whole. And like I said, the monk is a cheap alternative to the Master, and I feel the monk just doesn't fill the hole where the Master should be. So overall, it has all the hallmarks to be a classic 3rd Doctor story, but it just didn't quite reach the levels I was hoping for. You know, like I said, UNIT could have been involved. We could have had Benton and Yates involved instead of having a new UNIT character. And the Poundland Master thing with the monk just didn't work for me. But I still enjoyed the story, because the interactions are what made it for me. So I'm going to give Rise of the New Humans an 8 out of 10. Okay, on to The Tyrants of Logic, the story we've all been waiting for. Yes, written by Mark Platt, and if you know your Big Finish Cyberman stories, you know that Mark Platt is the king of them, you know. He's wrote Spare Parts, The Silver Turk, two of my favourite Cyberman audios and favourite Big Finish stories. So I was incredibly excited, you know. This is the third Doctor versus the Cybermen, you know, my favourite Doctor and my favourite monster. You know, what's not to love? So I feel like Mark Platt did deliver a hat-trick. This is another classic Cyberman story in my eyes. Personally, I did have a little bit of worry with this story, I will say this, because the last story I listened to of Mark Platt was The Behemoth, and The Behemoth wasn't a story I really liked, so there was a little bit of concern. And when I downloaded this and I looked at the running time for each episode, I thought, okay, this is a beast of a story. You know, the shortest episode within this box set, well, story I should say, is 31 minutes, and the longest episode is 39 minutes. So it is this big, chunky story. So you do have this thing in your mind going, okay, are we going to have some padding? Is this going to be quite a padded story? But thankfully, in my eyes, I feel like the length of the episodes is well justified. This is a story fans have been wanting for so many years. So I feel like the length of the episodes is well justified, and I feel like this is a true classic Cyberman story by Mark Platt. It's another great hit by him. But I will say this with this story, there's a danger of overhyping this, and I'm trying not to overhype this story because I do love this story, but I don't want you to, you know, get false impressions thinking that this is this big epic, you know, armies of humans versus armies of Cybermen, because it's not that. It's a very self-contained Cyberman story. You know, this is set after the Cyber Wars. So the Cybermen are very much depleted and regrouping and reforming and starting to rise up again. So that's good, really. So I best talk about the story in depth because I love Tyrant of Logic. So let's go into an in-depth look at this. Part 1, I have to say, is a very good opening episode, as it will build this abandoned, creepy, unsettling, harsh environment really well. It also sets up the main supporting characters again extremely well, with us getting their backstories of how they all link to the Cyber War, so I really like that. We do get a bit of body horror with the space crew, and the story also lays down the main foundations of the plot, you know, what's in the container, who is the leveler, what's Greer's mission, you know, and why are the space crew primed. And I will say this, the first 5 minutes I was pretty unsure about the direction this story was going to go, but looking back on it, you know, it adds more context to part 1, and the cliffhanger is just a good old-fashioned classic cliffhanger. Part 2, we ramp it up to another level with a pretty action start with the Cybermen blowing up, and one thing I really like about this story is the sense of dread and fear from the supporting characters, as they know what the Cybermen do. So even when the Cybermen aren't present within the story, where you don't see them, you know, they still have a presence so within the story. Really does build the fear factor of the Cybermen. But this part is very much, you know, a lot of concern and urgency, you know, that they must protect this container. The Cybermen can't have it or else the war will begin again. But we also have some really lovely touching moments. You know, we're introduced to another concept, you know, the cyber smoke, which I really like, you know, as it basically begins priming humans for conversion. And we're also introduced to the cyber leveler, and, you know, the third Doctor properly locks horns with the Cybermen, and you can just imagine this, you know, the Cyber Patrol heading towards him, and you can picture the third Doctor with his hands on his hips and just looking all defiant, you know, in this snowy landscape. It's just wonderful imagery, I think, and the cliffhanger again ramps the story up to another level. Part 3 is very much the hunt for the Cyber Leveler, so this episode is very much a chase episode, but it's not really a chase episode, if that makes sense. As this story we start to expand more on the world, you know, with exploring more of the planet, and, you know, the Cybermen are homing in. So this episode does have quite a dark moment within it, and it's quite an interesting scene and quite a brutal scene, I must say. But to sort of contrast that, we do have some lovely scenes with the Doctor, especially the Doctor admiring the view. So that's quite a nice character progression, because we see the third Doctor talking about his exile on Earth, because that's basically his character arc, really about, you know, Earth being his home, but the universe is really where he belongs, really, you know, his quest for his knowledge. So yeah, I like that because it expands and continues the third Doctor's sort of character arc and progression, really. Part 4, the longest episode, and oh boy, what an episode this is. This is true cyber action with them fighting, you know, being very persistent, and it just shows the desperation of the Cybermen. The story becomes very much a base under siege, but I do feel this story, this part of the story does kind of lose a bit of its shine. The scenes between the Third Doctor and the Cyber Leveler are just fantastic, and the resolution I really liked because it wraps up everything really well. On to characters now. The Doctor, played by Tim Trelaw, nothing but praise again. I think Mark Platt did a great job writing for him, with him being rather intrigued by this world, and very urgent and concerned because he knows about the Cybermen. And part 3, we do see the Third Doctor play a very interesting role, and we see the Third Doctor soon take charge. Jo Grant, played by Katie Manning, just lovely and bubbly, with her being quite jokey, loving the TARDIS wardrobe. But as the story progresses, she does, become more serious, but she does try to keep the Doctor's spirits up, and the story really does show her caring nature. Chad, played by Jeff Rawley, what a groovy character. Him and his wife, Gusto, a really nice play on a Cyberman, as Chad is basically a walking one-man band, and you can imagine the sort of the accordion representing a chest unit, and he's just a really lovable character, and just feels like a proper 1970s character, really. I just love him, he's great. Gusto, played by Linda Marlowe, lovely character, very troubled and haunted by her past, as her and Chad escaped cyber conversion, and she's just very much sort of thinking maybe it's time we move on from this planet and move elsewhere. So yeah, very lovely character. Greer, played by Rowan Summers, very much the cyber hunter, cold, quite distant, isolated character, very focused on his mission. But he does lighten up as the story progresses. Again, very good performance by him. So what are my overall thoughts on the Tyrant of Logic? Well, I think that this is a fantastic Cyberman story. The Cybermen are very good within it, with it expanding on their technology, with us getting a bit of new technology in the form of cyber smoke, mixed with the good old-fashioned cybermats, and the Leveler being a very good concept, with it being the next level up from a cyber planner, and being very much a portable battle computer, but the design I think is rather odd. And what's quite interesting within this, we see, well, I should say, what's quite interesting within this, we have the Revenge of the Cyberman gun sound effect, which is quite nice to hear, and it's quite a nice bit of continuity, I guess. But I feel like this story practically has everything. It has action to some really touching character moments, and I just love Tyrant of Logic. I think that it's not the Cyberman story what we were all expecting, but it's certainly a jolly good adventure with the Third Doctor and Jo. So I'm going to give the Tyrant of Logic a 10 out of 10. Despite my little faults with it, like being unsure with the start and the story kind of losing a little bit in the end, I still really enjoyed it. So I'm going to give this story a 10 out of 10. I just absolutely love it. It's another classic done by Mark Platt. Fantastic story, Tyrant of Logic. Oh, utterly amazing. So what are my concluding thoughts on the Third Doctor Adventures Volume 4? Well, it's positive. I absolutely love this box set. It's one of my favourite Third Doctor box sets, what Big Finish have done. It's the most consistent of the range so far, because like I said, the range for me has been very hit or miss, with one story being good and the other one just being average or poor. But this is the first box set where I can say, yep, this is consistent. Both stories are fantastic in their own right. I think Rise of the New Humans, though I say it's quite hollow and empty, it would have been nice to have seen Yates and Benton included within that, but I do feel like it is a good story to break you back into the world of the Third Doctor, just because the interaction between the Third Doctor and Jo, it's just a nice story to break you back into the Third Doctor's world, whereas Tyrant of Logic is more of a plot-driven story instead of a character-based story, though it does have its character moments and pushes the characters further. I feel that Tyrant of Logic compared to Rise of the New Humans is more of a plot-driven story, and like I said, Tyrant of Logic is superb because it just expands more on the Cybermen. It's just quite nice just to hear the Third Doctor, and quite refreshing to hear the Cybermen, because I feel like I'm very sick of hearing the Daleks now, and it's just quite refreshing to hear the Cybermen have a bit of time to shine. So yeah, what would I like to see next for the Third Doctor Adventures? I would like to see Benton and Yates more involved, because it just seems a bit of a waste having those two actors not being involved. I know John Levine speaks very highly of John Pertwee. I was very lucky to interview him a couple of years ago, and he spoke that John Pertwee was very much like a father figure for him. So I'm not sure how he would take to Tim Trelaw. So I personally would like to see more Third Doctor releases. I would like to see maybe another volume of these, or maybe a companion chronicle box set, so you can use John Levine. If he's not comfortable with Tim Trelaw, then you can put John Levine in a companion chronicle box set, and you can just use those people in there. And I think for Tim Trelaw's sake that we need another volume, because you know he's going to lose all the progress and get a bit rusty, so I think having that year gap isn't very good for him. So I feel like having at least 2 releases a year is fantastic. And plus, the Third Doctor doesn't get many releases on Big Finish. This is his only release for the year. So I feel like the Third Doctor needs to up the ante, you know, up the dosage of releases, just so there's something to tide us over, to keep the Third Doctor fans happy, really, because I think there's just so much time has passed since, you know, another volume. So I feel like we need, you know, at least 2 Third Doctor releases, so you can have a Companion Chronicle box at the end of the year and have, you know, the Third Doctor Adventures volumes in sort of the start of the year. So I feel like there should be another Third Doctor release just to tide us over, really. So I'd like to see more Third Doctor releases, because I think this will hopefully open Big Finish's eyes and go, well, there is a market for the Third Doctor stuff, so we might as well produce some more stuff. And that's what I'd like to see. I'd love to see some more Third Doctor, because I'm a bit sad if he's being pushed out of the Big Finish equation, because most Doctors get at least 2 or 3 releases a year. Third Doctor's only getting 1, so I'd like to see the Third Doctor become a bit more prominent in the Big Finish front. So there we go, those are my thoughts on the Third Doctor Adventures and the future I'd like to see. So there we go, thank you very much for watching this review. I highly recommend this box set. If I was to get one of these box sets, definitely get volume 4, because it's the most consistent. So there we go, thank you very much for watching this review, and I'll see you next time. So thank you very much, and bye bye.